The counting happened in the square where everyone could see. Names were called, portions measured, and I watched each family receive their share of grain. When my name came, silence fell. The elder's hand hesitated over the sack, and whispers began. "Does he truly need a full portion?" someone asked. "He contributes so little." Another voice joined in, louder now. My mother looked at the ground. My father shifted uncomfortably. The elder finally gave me half of what others received, and no one protested. I took it without speaking, my flute pressed against my ribs beneath my shirt. As I turned to leave, old Keshar leaned toward his neighbor, his voice carrying through the quiet square. "Some weights sink the boat," he muttered, and several heads nodded in agreement. I kept walking, feeling their eyes on my back like stones. The crops failed for the third year. First the wheat turned brown before harvest, then the barley withered at the roots. Our livestock began dying too. Healthy one day, stiff and cold the next. The village needed someone to blame, and I felt their suspicions settling on me like morning frost. "Did you notice?" I heard them say. "The troubles started when Aru came of age. He's always been different. Weak, strange." My mother stopped defending me. Even she began watching me with uncertain eyes. I spent more time alone, wandering the edges of our land with my flute. Then one evening, little Mira ran screaming into the village. She'd followed me into the woods, she said, and heard my flute playing near the old tree. "The ground was humming," she insisted, her small face pale with fear. "Humming back to his music." They found me at dawn, lying with my ear pressed against the cold earth beneath the ancient tree. Its roots spread like veins across the clearing, thick as a man's body. I'd been there all night, listening. The headman grabbed my shoulder and yanked me upright. "What are you doing?" he demanded. The other men circled, hands on their tools. I tried to explain what I'd discovered, the sound I'd been tracking for weeks. "There's moving water," I told them, pointing down. "Deep below us where none should exist." They stared at me like I'd confessed to witchcraft. "You hear water in dry ground," the headman scoffed. But even as he spoke, I felt it again, that subtle trembling in the earth, rhythmic and alive. The roots around us seemed to pulse with it. One of the younger men stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "Did you feel that?" he whispered. The ground beneath the ancient tree had answered my claim with a gentle, undeniable shudder. Elder Keshar was summoned. At 90 years old, he remembered stories the rest had forgotten. He sat on the council bench, his gnarled fingers trembling as he spoke of the forest's forbidden past. "There were tales," he began, then stopped. His eyes found me in the crowd. Something passed across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. "Tales of what?" the headman pressed. But Keshar had gone silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. He shook his head slowly and would say nothing more. The council met that evening without me present. I waited outside the hall with the other young people, listening to raised voices within. They emerged, their faces set with grim resolution. "We must remove the risk," the headman announced to the gathered villagers. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked away. "The village comes first," Keshar added quietly, still refusing to meet my eyes. "Always." The arguments started before dawn. I heard them through the thin walls of our home, voices rising and falling in desperate debate. Some families spoke for me. The miller's wife reminded everyone I'd never harmed anyone. The blacksmith noted that correlation wasn't causation. But fear is louder than reason. By midday the decision was made. They called it a necessary sacrifice, though no one could explain precisely what they were sacrificing me to. My father came to tell me himself, tears running into his beard. "We have no choice," he whispered. "The many outweigh the one." I asked if he believed I'd cursed the village. He couldn't answer. My mother packed a small bag for me, bread, dried meat, a water skin. She tucked my flute inside without speaking. That night, I watched through my window as they prepared the cart. The wood creaked as they reinforced it for the journey. Tomorrow they would take me to the forest and leave me beneath the ancient tree. Tomorrow I would face whatever waited there alone. My family stood in the doorway as they loaded me onto the cart. I searched their faces for some sign of protest, some last-moment change of heart. Nothing. My younger sister was crying, but my mother held her back. My father's hands were clenched at his sides, knuckles white. "Can I keep my flute?" he asked. It was the only question I had. The headman hesitated, then nodded. "It won't matter where you're going," he said. I climbed onto the cart myself, saving them the shame of forcing me. As we began to move, I looked back one final time. My mother had turned away completely. My father stared at me with hollow eyes, but his feet remained planted. He would not follow. He would not save me. The cart rolled through the village, and faces appeared in windows, watching. No one waved goodbye. Above us, clouds were gathering with unnatural speed, dark and heavy, swirling inward from every direction toward the distant forest. They left me as sunset bled through the trees. The ancient tree loomed above, its canopy blocking the dying light. The men who'd driven the cart worked quickly, avoiding my gaze. Within minutes I was alone. Night came fast in the forest, and with it, a profound silence. I sat against the massive trunk and pulled out my flute. My fingers found the familiar holes, and I played a single note. Soft, sustained, questioning. The sound should have faded quickly in the open air. Instead it echoed. Not from the trees around me but from below. The note resonated through the roots, amplifying, multiplying, until it seemed the entire earth was humming in harmony. I stopped playing abruptly, my heart hammering. The vibration continued for several seconds before fading. Then the sky split open. Lightning struck the forest with a violence I'd never witnessed. Not once, but again and again, illuminating the trees in stark white flashes. Thunder shook my bones. And through it all, the ancient tree stood untouched, while the storm raged everywhere else. The storm battered the village with merciless fury. I learned this later, but that night I only knew the forest's rage. Rain fell in solid sheets, turning the ground to mud. Wind tore at the canopy above, sending branches crashing down around me. I pressed myself against the ancient tree's trunk, and somehow, impossibly, it sheltered me. Water ran off its bark in streams, but where I huddled, I stayed dry. Lightning struck again and again, each bolt hitting the tree directly. I should have been killed instantly. Instead, I felt the energy flowing through the roots beneath me, traveling downward into the earth. The tree was channeling it somewhere deep, somewhere hungry for power. Then came the roar. It started so low I felt it before I heard it, a grinding, rumbling sound from far underground. The earth heaved beneath me, roots writhing like serpents. Cracks appeared in the soil, spreading outward in geometric patterns. I clung to the tree and played my flute again, instinctively, desperately. The storm responded, intensifying around us in a final, catastrophic crescendo. By morning the storm had passed. The village counted its damages: broken fences, flooded cellars, a collapsed barn, but everyone had survived. They should have felt relieved. Instead, unease settled over them like fog. My name surfaced in whispered conversations. "What have we done?" my mother asked my father. "What if we were wrong?" He had no answer. The guilt spread through the community, slow and toxic. People avoided each other's eyes in the square. Children asked where I'd gone, and adults fumbled for explanations. On the third day, hunters returned from the forest. They'd gone to check the trap lines, following the old paths toward the distant mountains. But when they entered the village square, their faces were bloodless. The headman approached them, concerned. "What did you see?" he demanded. The lead hunter's voice shook as he answered. "Something's happened at the old tree," he said. "Something impossible." The crowd pressed closer. "What? Tell us." The hunter looked around at the gathered faces, at my parents standing near the back. You need to see it yourselves, he whispered. They came in a procession, half the village following the hunters back into the forest. The clearing had transformed. Where the ancient tree had stood surrounded by dead earth, water now bubbled up from the ground. A spring, clear, cold, abundant, erupted from between the massive roots. The water formed a pool before flowing away in multiple directions, carving new streams through the forest floor. It was impossible. This land had been dry for generations. The bedrock beneath us held no aquifers, no underground rivers. Yet here was water, more than the village had seen in years. The headman stood frozen, staring at the impossible spring. Then someone screamed. A woman pointed toward the base of the tree. There, slumped against the trunk but breathing steadily, was me. I was unconscious but alive, my flute still clutched in my hands. My clothes were dry despite the surrounding water. The bark behind me bore lightning scars, blackened and split, yet I was untouched. The boy is alive, the hunter whispered, and the words rippled through the crowd like a confession. The villagers carried me back on a litter, their faces silent with shame. I woke during the journey, confused by the gentle handling and the worried glances. By the time we reached the village, news of the spring had spread. People lined the path, staring as I passed. My mother rushed forward, sobbing, trying to embrace me. Pulled away. My father offered me our home, our table, and his protection. I refused. The spring had changed something in me. I could feel it now, that connection I'd always sensed but never understood. The water wasn't separate from me. It responded to my presence, to my breath, and to the rhythm of my heart. They tried to make me comfortable in the village, but I couldn't sleep there. The walls felt wrong, suffocating. On the third night, I gathered my belongings and walked back to the forest. I built a small shelter near the spring, close enough to hear its constant murmuring. Within days, the water had reached the village fields. Crops that had been dying suddenly straightened, turned green, and began to grow. The village was saved. And I, the burden they'd abandoned, would not return to live among them. Life found a strange new rhythm. I lived beside the spring while the village learned to thrive again. Farmers brought offerings, bread, cheese, and tools I didn't need. I accepted them politely but felt no warmth. They were buying forgiveness, not offering friendship. I noticed something curious in those early weeks. If I walked too far from the spring for too long, the water's flow diminished. Not stopping entirely, but weakening to a trickle. When I returned, it surged again, rushing over the stones with renewed vigor. At first I thought it coincidence. Then I tested it deliberately, walking to the far edge of the forest and staying there. By evening a farmer came running. "The spring," he gasped. "It's almost dry." I returned, and the water rose within minutes. The villagers noticed too. The elders gathered near my shelter one evening, watching from a distance as I played my flute. The spring's surface rippled in patterns that matched my melody, rising and falling with each note. Their faces showed a mixture of wonder and calculation. I could see them beginning to understand what they'd truly abandoned in the forest and what they'd accidentally found. They began documenting the pattern with scientific precision. Village scribes noted the spring's depth at different times, correlating it with my proximity. When I was near, the water ran strong. When I walked to the village for supplies, it slowed. When I played my flute, it danced. The correlation was undeniable, measurable, and strange. The headman visited my shelter, humble now in a way he'd never been before. "We need to understand this," he said carefully. "For the good of everyone." I said nothing, just gestured to the spring. "Study it if you wish," my silence said. "I have no answers for you." But Elder Keshar came too. His ancient frame supported by two younger men. He'd avoided me since my return, guilt and shame keeping him away. Now he stood at the spring's edge, tears running down his weathered face. "I should have told them," he whispered. "I should have remembered completely." The headman turned sharply. "Remembered what?" Keshar's voice trembled as he spoke the forbidden truth he'd buried for decades. The land once chose a listener, he said. Long ago, before my grandfather's time. Someone who could hear the earth's voice and speak back to it. The legend spilled out of Keshar like a confession. In generations past, the land had selected certain individuals to serve as intermediaries, listeners who could sense the earth's needs and respond. They were never strong, Keshar explained. Never warriors or leaders. The land chose differently. It wanted patience, sensitivity, and mercy. The legend regarded the qualities we called weaknesses as gifts. These listeners could find water where none seemed to exist, could feel disasters before they struck, and could channel the earth's power during storms. In return, they required respect, protection, and trust. What happened to them? Someone asked. Keshar's face crumpled. We forgot, he said simply. The old ways faded. The stories became children's tales, then nothing at all. I heard fragments as a boy, but I didn't believe. I didn't connect them to. He looked at me with devastating clarity. To what was happening before our eyes. The headman's voice was hollow. The listener was never meant to be harmed. No, Keshar confirmed. They were sacred, honored. Abandoning one would be. He couldn't finish. The word hung in the air anyway. Blasphemy. The spring began changing the week after Keshar's revelation. The water flowed faster and deeper, carving its channels wider through the forest floor. What had been a gentle source became a powerful force, rushing over stones and roots with increasing intensity. I felt it in my bones. A shift, a warning, a consequence building toward some unknown threshold. Elder Keshar came to me alone one evening, moving slowly without his escorts. He sat beside me at the spring's edge, both of us watching the water surge past. Blessings can turn if betrayed, he said quietly. That was in the old stories too. The land gives, but it also remembers. I asked him what would happen. I don't know, he admitted. The legends never went that far. No one believed we would be foolish enough to take such risks. He gestured vaguely at the forest, the village, and me. To do what we did. That night the ground cracked. A sharp, splitting sound that woke the village from sleep. By morning, a fissure had opened near the village center. Not deep yet, but widening. Water seeped from it, cold and dark. The spring, it seemed, was spreading. Not in gentle streams, but in cracks and fractures, as if the earth itself was breaking open to release what we'd tried to bury. The elders came as a group this time. All of them, the headmen and council members, even my parents trailing behind. They approached my shelter with downcast eyes and careful words. Aru, the headman began. His voice stripped of authority. We beg you. Live among us again. Return to the village. I looked at them, these people who'd debated my worth over grain portions, who'd sacrificed me to their fear. My mother was crying quietly. My father's face was gray with shame. Please, another elder added. We understand now. We were wrong. You belong with us. I spoke then, my voice calm but firm. I do belong, I agreed. But trust cannot be forced. You sent me here to die because it was easier than believing in me. Now you ask me to return because I'm useful. The words hung between us. That's not the same as being wanted. They tried to argue, to promise change, and to swear on their children's lives that things would be different. I listened politely and refused gently. That night, I felt the spring's intention clearly. It was moving, shifting its primary source deeper into the forest, away from the village. It was either following me or simply leaving behind those who had broken faith. Keshar came alone one final time. His strength nearly gone. He had something more to tell me, something he'd remembered in fragments and dreams. The listener carries the land's pain, he whispered, settling beside my fire. That's the burden no one speaks of. He explained it slowly, his mind reaching back through decades of forgotten lore. The listener didn't just find water or channel storms. They absorbed disasters meant for others. The crops failed around them because they drew the failure into themselves, sparing the wider land. Livestock died nearby because death needed a specific location, and it was better for it to occur there than to affect everywhere else. You were taking the village's suffering, Keshar said, tears streaming. Your presence concentrated misfortune in one place, around you, so it wouldn't spread across everything we had. I sat silent, understanding washing over me in cold waves. The weakness I'd felt, the strange exhaustion, the way trouble seemed to follow me. None of it was a curse. It was service. Without you, Keshar continued, his voice breaking, the land will reclaim its balance. The disasters you absorbed will come back, distributed as they should have been all along. We'll survive, but... He couldn't finish, but I understood. Without the listener they'd rejected, the land would no longer offer protection. The spring's transformation accelerated. Water that had flowed in gentle streams became a torrent, flooding parts of the forest nearest the village. Trees stood in growing pools. The ground turned soft and treacherous. My shelter was untouched. The water flowed around it instinctively, but everywhere else the forest was drowning. Villagers came to investigate and found themselves ankle-deep in mud. The cracks near the village widened further, and now water gushed from them with force. Not enough to destroy, but enough to threaten. Cellars flooded. The old stone foundations began to shift. Elder Keshar's words echoed in my mind. Blessings can turn if betrayed. This wasn't the land's rage, I realized. It was simply the truth revealing itself. The blessing had never belonged to the village. It was borrowed mercy, extended through me, conditional on faith and honor. They'd broken that condition. Now the terms were changing. I began preparing to leave permanently. The forest was vast, and I could feel other places calling. Places where the earth still needed a listener, where my presence might be welcomed rather than feared. I packed my few belongings, my flute wrapped carefully in cloth. They came in a desperate crowd. The entire village, it seemed, men and women and children, all begging me to stay. They offered everything they'd once denied. A home in the village center, a seat on the council, the first portion at every distribution, respect and honor and protection. My mother fell to her knees. My father wept openly. Name your price, the headman pleaded. Anything you want, it's yours. I stood before them with my packed bag and my flute. For a moment I almost pitied them. They still didn't understand. The land heard your cruelty clearly, I said quietly. Every word spoken against me, every moment you measured my worth in grain and labor. You can't erase that with promises now. I explained what Keshar had taught me, that I'd been absorbing their disasters, carrying their pain, and serving them even as they cursed my name. You called me a weight that would sink the boat, I continued. You were right, but you never understood that some weights are anchors. They don't slow you down, they keep you from drifting into the open sea. I raised my flute and played one last note. The spring responded, surging one final time before settling into something calmer, more stable. Then I stepped past them into the deeper forest, toward whatever waited beyond. The spring stabilized in the weeks after I left. The water neither disappeared nor continued flooding. It settled into a steady, moderate flow, enough to sustain the village, but no longer abundant. The cracks stopped widening but never fully closed. The village survived. They had water, they had crops, and they had livestock. But the easy prosperity they'd briefly glimpsed was gone. Harvests were adequate, not plentiful. Animals were healthy, not thriving. The land gave what was necessary and nothing more. Elder Keshar died that winter. On his deathbed, Elder Keshar dictated a final account of the listener legend for the village archives, hoping that future generations would learn what his generation had failed to understand. My parents left my room untouched for years, a shrine to their guilt. The headman stepped down from his position, unable to bear the weight of what he'd orchestrated. Sometimes, travelers passing through the region reported seeing a young man in the distant hills, playing a flute beside mountain springs. The water there, they said, was the sweetest they'd ever tasted. Back in the village, the inscription Keshar had written was carved into stone near the spring. Some weights do not slow us down. They keep the ground from breaking beneath our feet.